気温がね、またね、来るわけよ。一日ね。いちいち。見直されるわけよ。もうこんなの感じてたらね、もう歌えないから。
Oops. Spinach and aubergines. Aubergine. Aubergines were alternated with other crops to ensure the soil was kept rich in nitrates. Medieval European farmers developed their own system of crop rotation using the soil was kept rich in nutrients. Medieval European farmers developed their own system of crop rotation using the regime clover to provide essential fertilizer. In the civilization of Central America, planting beans were planted alongside gourds and maize. Goes and maize. Wow. Goes. Goes and maize, once more ensuring the ground was filled with nitrogen-rich nutrients. But in the early 20th century, the natural bargain between bacteria, plants, and humans began to break down. Two German scientists, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch, pioneered an industrial process that could artificially fix nitrogen without the need of plant bacteria or saltpeter. They found that by heating nitrogen and hydrogen gas under high pressure, they could synthesize large quantities of ammonia, so that by 1915, a new age of artificial fertilizers was born. Now, any country could make its own supplies of gunpowder and fertilizers using nothing more than fossil fuels to generate the heat required to run the process. Imperial dependency on saltpeter from the driest desert of the world, India and Chile, where the main source was abandoned, along with the steam trains of Banquedano that once transported huge volumes of the stuff from inland mines to ports on the coast. The historic impact on nitrogen fixing Rhizobium leguminosarum and its several closely related prokaryotic varieties is beyond doubt. Without them, the Neolithic revolution from which human agriculture has its origins It most probably have stalled through soil exhaustion, throwing into doubt the long-term viability of settled human civilizations. Its other big impact began in the mid-19th century when Taoist monks in China discovered how to manufacture gunpowder from naturally occurring nitrates. But future prospect for a revival in widespread organic nourishment for the world's soil now look brighter. Scientists and government alike are aware of the environmental side effects of modern food production system on the Earth's climate and the eventual depletion of fossil fuel supplies. The Haber process alone uses as much as 5% of the world's total production of natural gas. How much more safe, efficient, and cost-effective are nature's bacterial systems that use none? Artificial fertilizers also acidify the soil and release additional greenhouse gases such as ammonia and nitrogen dioxide into the atmosphere. Traditional organic methods that rely on nitrogen-fixing bacteria and their legume host are the only known long-term source of soil fertilizer. All organic farming depends on them. Therefore, the story of Rhizobia, the nitrogen-fixing bacterium, is likely to have a future just as important as its past, even if, for a few eccentric years, it went briefly out of fashion when the world went fossil fuel mad. On symbiosis, how genes and cells uh, converged, establishing a new set of evolutionary rules that led to multicellular life. Symbiosis. Slime mold. Phylum Mycetozoa, species Dictyostelium discoideum, rank 74. The surprising origins of intelligent, self-organizing systems. It must have been one of the most bizarre announcements in the history of scientific research. In the autumn of the year 2000, Japanese scientist Toshiyuki Nakagaki told the world how a slime mold could successfully navigate its way through a maze by the shortest possible route. It was, he claimed, a demonstration of the most primitive form of earthly intelligence. Working with a team of researchers at the Biomimetic Control Research Center in Nagoya, Nakagaki dotted several pieces of slime throughout the 3 centimeter by 3 centimeter maze constructed on top of a plate of agar. A- agar. Agar. Over the course of a few hours, the blobs glue tube-like structures called pseudopodia that cause the whole maze to fill with a long, sticky column of slime. There were 4 possible routes through the maze. Food was placed at board's exit. After 8 hours, the column of slime had shrunk so that its body filled only the parts of the maze that formed the shorter route from one piece of food to the other. Remarkably, it had worked out how to organize itself into the most efficient possible shape for foraging for food, and in the process, solve the puzzle of finding the quickest and the most direct passage through the maze. Slime molds are living descendants of some of the earliest form of eukaryotic life. Since their modern discovery in North Carolina forest in 1935, scientists all over the world have been fascinated by their extraordinary behavior. Slimes are so puzzling that they have variously been classified as plants, animals, and fungi. The consensus today is that while these creatures share some characteristics with all three, they rightfully belong in a separate kingdom altogether called ameblo. Recent genetic sequencing of the slime uh, mold Dictyostelium discoideum confirms their evolutionary significance. They split off from the eukaryotic tree very early on, just after the initial division between plants and animals and before the first sign of fungi. The peculiar life cycle of the slime mold, brilliantly demonstrates how versatile life became once symbiotic cells. Eukaryotes had evolved new roles for collaborative living. As the slime mold maze experiment shows, the emergence of what humans understand as basic intelligence starts right here. The slime life cycle begins when spores hatch out on moist ground, growing into single-cell eukaryotes that graze on bacteria in the soil or on rotten logs. Their flexible cell structure allows them to surround their prey, engulfing and then digesting, digesting it as food. This process, called phagocytosis, is of special interest to modern science as it represents the earliest appearance in nature of tactics later employed by vertebrate animals to fight disease. While blood cells in our bodies behave just like individual slime cells, engulfing and digesting bacterial invaders to neutralize any threat they pose to the body. Recent genetic sequencing of Dictyostelium discoideum shows that the genes responsible for attacking disease in humans are essentially the same as those found in this much more ancient slime mold. Slime's real eccentricity becomes apparent when food runs short. Individual cells secrete a chemical, adenylylsucrase, that acts like an alarm informing other nearby slime cells that since food is scarce, genetic survival depends on collaboration. So Slime's real eccentricity becomes apparent when food runs short. Individual cells secrete a chemical adenylsucrase that acts like an alarm informing other nearby slime cells that since food is scarce, genetic survival depends on collaboration. They do not engage in a war over scarce resources. Instead, they group together in an orderly manner to form a completely new multicellular creature, a type of slug from scratch. For years, scientists thought there must be some master cell coordinating the process. If only they could observe this bizarre behavior closely enough, but it is now clear that slime cells represent a natural self-organizing system. The collective actions of many individuals following a simple set of collaborative rules result in intelligent group behavior. As soon as the cell emits the chemical alarm, its neighbors either move towards the chemical or amplify its effect by secreting more alarm signals. In this way, moving in highly regulated 6-minute pulses, up to 100,000 cells can rapidly swarm to form a single body or multicellular slime. The aggregate organism substantially increases the chance of successfully finding food, as ably shown by the slime in the Japanese maze. Since as a collective its size, reach and powers of movement and detection are so much greater than those of any one individual. When conditions are just right, the slime mold began to metamorphose once again. Within about 10 hours, it has turned itself into a fruit. Fruit. Turn itself into a fruit. Some cells then sacrifice themselves to form a dead stalk made of cellulose that rises up other cells at the front that have turned into balls of hardened spores ready to be blown away by the wind. Like the bacterium anthrax, these well-protected cells can survive for years, waiting for a favorable moment to begin germination, starting the slime's life cycle all over again. The significance of slime today lies in the insight this extraordinary life form has given into the working of evolution and emergent self-organizing systems. Intensive study of Dictyostelium discoidem since the 1960s and the sequencing of its genome completed in 2005 has yielded the fresh understanding of how complex intelligent systems arise without the need for centralized direction. In the last 50 years, humans have begun to mimic these systems, and a new branch of science called artificial life has emerged as a direct result. Open source software development, evolutionary computer games, the self-organizing maintenance of complex communication networks. Even the rise of Internet are just a few examples of the recent human application of natural systems that first evolved in the ancestors of today's slimy molds, hundreds of millions of years ago. water moles class all Mycetes species Phytophthora infestant rank 30. How a microscopic protocutist reshaped history. Protocutist. Protocutist, which includes such diverse groups as amoeba, algae, and slime, is one of the most ancient and least well-known divisions of eukaryotic life. Yet the influence of some of its species during recent human history, especially for those of Irish descent, has been especially profound. Of particular note are the oomycetes, microscopic unicellular creatures, more commonly known as water moles. Talented French botanist Heinrich Anton de Barry first described the parasitic creature Phytophthora infestant in 1861. Among his many weird fascinations was mixing tiny spores removed from the leaves of potato plants into drops of water, which he placed under a microscope. He was astonished to see that the spores germinated and multiplied, each growing their own tails and swimming about as if they were miniature tadpoles just hatched out from eggs. The more he watched, the more the Barry realized these were no normal vegetative fungi. When he saw how these miniature animals behave on the surface of potato leaves, he was amazed. Tubes seemed to grow out of the organisms, punching their way through the leaf's surface. A creature would then squeeze its way through the opening, leaving an empty, dead layer of skin behind. Once inside, it would swell, elongating and branching its way from cell to cell, helping itself to the plant's nutrients until the leaves were completely consumed. elongating and branching its way from cell to cell, helping itself to the plant's nutrients until the leaves were completely consumed. Eventually, the mold would fruit by thrusting its roots back up through the pores of the stu- can leave. Borne by the wind towards another nearby plant. Completely consumed, eventually the mold would fruit by thrusting its roots back up through the pores of the shuriken leaf so that its spores could be borne by the wind towards another nearby plant. The Barry quickly realized the significance of what he had observed, which is why in 1861 he named these microscopic creatures Phytophthora, meaning plant eater in Greek. Just 16 years earlier, the most devastating famine in modern times had struck the Western world. The berry had at last worked out its cause. In mid-19th century, Europe potatoes was still not accepted as respectable food on the dinner tables of many countries, associated as they were with the savage native of Central and South America. But this was not the case in Ireland. Laws passed by the ruling English Parliament prohibited the natives from owning more than a few acres of land each, so high-yielding potatoes had become a key part of poor people's diets. Tubers from these plants provided everything someone with only a little land could wish for. They were simple to grow, easy stored, and full of proteins and vitamins B and C. A diet of potato mashed with milk proved sufficient to feed a large family and all its livestock throughout the year. It was largely thanks to the potato that within 100 years of its introduction, the population of Ireland rocketed from 3 to 8 million. Meanwhile, more than 6,000 miles away in the mountains of Peru, the little protocutist Phytophthora infestan was enjoying its own population boom. On population boom, this time feasting. This time, feasting on potato plants grown by the indigenous agriculturalists of South America. Wisely, the ancestors of these industrious farmers cultivated hundreds of different potato varieties. This meant that if any one type succumbed to disease, other more resistant varieties could still be successfully farmed in their place, echoing the natural benefits of sexual reproduction. Echoing the natural benefits of sexual reproduction, their pursuit of biodiversity provided an insurance policy against devastating infection. In the early 1600s, when Spanish conquistadors subdued the Incas of South America, it seemed necessary to export only a few popular types of vegetables as curiosities back to Europe. Little did these opportunists realize just how variable these weird looking, knobbly tubers would eventually become. Nor did they appreciate the consequence of exporting only a handful of varieties, such as Lima, Peruvianus, and Cordilleras. It wasn't until the early 1840s that diseased tubers crossed the Atlantic Ocean in ships from North America to Europe, triggering outbreaks of late blight of Belgium, Germany, and Holland beginning in 1845. No country suffered quite like Ireland, so dependent were its people on their simple diet of potatoes and milk. After the failure of three harvests, 1845, 1847, and 1848, the country was devastated. More than 1 million of its people are thought to have died directly of starvation and disease brought on the malnutrition. Desperate to escape the appalling conditions of the worst famine to affect Europe since the time of the Black Death of 1348, millions of Irish fled. Driven off the land by laws that made anyone who owned more than a quarter of an acre ineligible for aid. Most went to America, also some settled in Canada and Australia. The impact on the Western world has been immense. The United States now has 36 million Irish Americans, 12% of its entire population. Not that Phytophthora infestans was the only cause of indeed the initial trigger of Irish emigration to the Americas, which began soon after the Napoleonic Wars. Yet its arrival in 1845 massively increased the flow. The effects of blight and its associated human emigrations have been felt ever since. From the global spread of Catholicism, two-thirds of Irish immigrants were Catholics, to an enduring bitterness between many English and Irish people over the failure of the British government to help its own people, a crime that some have since called genocide. The Blight triggered the demands for Irish independence, leading to the Irish War of Independence, the partitioning of the country into North and South, and the founding of an independent Ireland, ratified by the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921. Mm, a status quo that persists to this day. On symbiosis. Late blight in New Zealand in 1905 was one of the last water mouse epidemics, thanks to the effectiveness of a pesticide invented in 1885 called Bordeaux mixture, Also, Chinese potato plants remained unprotected as late as the 1950s, with the birth of synthetic pesticides following World War II. It seemed the story of potato blight, Phytophthora infestant, had finally come to a close, but never underestimated the power of eukaryotic sexual reproduction to secure the survival of a species. In the 1980s, a resurgence of new varieties of Phytophthora infestans gave the farming communities of America and then Europe a nasty shock. Mm, nasty. Nasty. Then Europe a nasty shock. Thanks to six new strains of water moles, they are capable of both sexual and asexual reproduction, began to appear with sufficient genetic diversity to benefit from at least some natural immunity to even the most persistent onslaught from artificial pesticides. Onslaught from artificial pesticides. In 1984, a sexual variant called A2 that originated in Colombia was spotted in Switzerland and has since been adventuring around Europe. To the utter utter dismay. Dismay of the potato farming community, it reached Ireland in 1989. During its progress, Phytophthora infestans have been mating with other strains, producing genetically unique specimens of enormous diversity, some of them offering resistance to traditional cars for late blight disease. So, blight is back. Phytophthora infestans is once again being described as the world's worst agricultural disease, costing farmers billions of dollars a year to contain. A new fight back is now underway by genetic scientists splicing genes taken from a wild South American potato plants, Sarnam bulbocasstanum, that has, over an unknown number of generations, developed its own natural immunity to these persistent protozoa this protocol test. Protocol test. These persistent on natural immunity to these persistent protocol test. Genetically modified protocol test resistant potatoes may eventually become a reality if only the world's seed stock can be comprehensively updated. Comprehensively. Comprehensively updated, but in true eukaryotic tradition, how long will it be before another sexual deviant saves its species from destruction by humans? Rhizobia. Family Rhizobiaceae, species Rhizobium leguminosarum, rank 4, a bacterium that largely accounts for the successful establishment of human civilization. Bakendano Railway Junction sits next to a derelict mining town in the scrub of the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. Jutting out from its old engine sheds. Jutting out. Jutting out from its old engine sheds. Engine shed. Which surround a giant disused turntable, which surrounded a giant disused turntable, the impressive hulks of several enormous steam trains, perfectly intact. They have been petrifying there in the scorching sun. Petrifying there in the scorching sun since being abandoned more than 100 years ago. This is like no other place on Earth. There's so little water that humidity actually reaches zero. A few poor locals still manage to get by, squatting in zinc-roofed houses built by British engineers at the end of the 19th century, when the town was at the center of a mighty international battle for the control of some of the world's most precious natural resources. Most coveted of all was saltpeter, a natural ingredient for manufacturing explosive and fertilizer vital to European nations such as Germany and Britain during the build-up to World War One. Saltpeter. Saltpeter. Ooh. Okay. Today's reading is finished.